They mocked her for the way she packed, but the contents of her luggage held a secret so powerful, even security forgot their protocols. The early afternoon sun streamed through the vast glass walls of the airport terminal, casting golden light across the polished floor. Passengers hurried through the lines, luggage wheels clacking, voices blending into a hum of anxious travel, and announcements echoing from overhead speakers. Amid the hustle, a woman stepped forward into the security checkpoint line. Quietly, without urgency or fanfare. She was Amina Daniels, tall and graceful in posture, though clearly weary from travel. Her skin, a rich mahogany hue, glowed subtly beneath the sunlight. Her eyes, deep and observant, scanned the room like someone used to reading people before speaking. She wore a simple, worn gray dress that hung modestly around her frame, and a dark blue headscarf, neatly wrapped. There was no designer bag on her shoulder, no watch, no jewelry, only a battered suitcase she dragged behind her with some effort. The suitcase caught people's attention immediately, not because of its beauty, but because of the exact opposite. It was large and square, its original color barely discernible under layers of faded stickers and peeling labels from countries all over the world. India, Uganda, Bolivia, Cambodia, and dozens more. The corners were dented, a few metal edges bent out of shape. A thick line of silver duct tape ran diagonally across one side, holding what looked like a seam that had split long ago. The handle wobbled when she pulled it, groaning faintly with every roll. The bottom looked slightly scorched, as if it had once been too close to an open flame. From a few feet away at the security counter, Tom, a stocky, middle-aged security agent with thinning hair, elbowed his partner and grinned. "Hey, Lisa," he muttered under his breath, nodding toward Amina and her suitcase. "Did she drag that thing out of a dumpster?" Lisa, a younger woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, snorted and tried to hold back a laugh. "I didn't know we were accepting refugee cargo today." They exchanged a smug look, both chuckling quietly to themselves, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that Amina could hear them perfectly. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn around. Her eyes remained ahead, focused on the conveyor belt and the slow crawl of the passengers ahead. But her fingers tightened slightly around the suitcase handle, just for a second. Then she exhaled softly, like a wave, retreating back to sea and stepped forward as the line moved. As she approached the counter, the harsh fluorescent lights above cast every blemish of the suitcase in stark detail. A white sticker from the World Health Organization was barely clinging to one side, half covered by scuff marks and smudges. The lock was rusted. The zipper pull had been replaced by a thin length of rope, knotted several times over. The other travelers behind her looked on curiously, some in pity, others in distaste. A man in a crisp business suit shifted uncomfortably, as if afraid the suitcase might somehow soil his expensive shoes. A teenage girl openly snapped a photo of the strange-looking luggage with her phone. And still, Amina said nothing. Tom sighed dramatically as she stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, clearly trying to sound polite but failing. "We'll need to check that bag manually." Lisa rolled her eyes behind Amina, already snapping on latex gloves. "Standard procedure," she added with a smirk, though her tone made it clear she was expecting something ridiculous inside. Old clothes, strange foods, or who knew what else. She tapped the edge of the bag with her shoe. "If it doesn't fall apart first." Amina offered a quiet nod. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "Of course." Her calmness seemed to throw them off for just a moment, as though they'd expected a defensive response. But she didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She simply stepped aside and watched, as they slowly reached for the zipper, hands still chuckling beneath the surface of their professionalism. The conveyor belt hummed. People whispered. The suitcase sat between them all, unassuming, quiet, nearly forgotten by time, but about to speak volumes in a language no one in that room had expected. And still, Amina waited. Quiet, patient, as though she had lived this moment more than once before. Tom cleared his throat and took a deliberate step forward, posture stiff with feigned authority. "We're going to open the suitcase for further inspection," he announced, though his voice carried more performance than necessity. "It looks suspicious." The words hung in the air for a second too long. Amina didn't respond. She only stepped to the side with a quiet grace, folding her hands in front of her. Her eyes stayed on the suitcase, not on the agents, not on the gathering stares around her. Tom crouched beside the worn-out bag, giving a low theatrical whistle as he examined it. "This thing looks like it's been through 3 wars, he muttered, half to himself, half for the crowd. "Better hope nothing crawls out of it." Lisa smirked and stood nearby, gloved hands ready. The suitcase sat in the center of the checkpoint table now, its duct-taped edges cracking slightly with the pressure. It seemed to breathe with tension, bulging at the seams as if holding its breath with the rest of the room. The people in line had begun to slow. Some stopped altogether. A man pulled out his phone discreetly. A child peeked out from behind his mother's coat. Curiosity, the most human of instincts, rippled like a current across the room. Tom reached for the rope zipper pull, hesitated for a second, then tugged. The zipper moved slowly, grating like something straining to release its burden. The teeth clicked apart one by one, revealing just the smallest sliver of the suitcase's contents. There, nestled between layers of fabric and what looked like thick padding, was the glint of something golden. Tom blinked. "What the—" Lisa leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Probably some cheap souvenirs or trinkets," she said flatly. "You know, tourist junk. She's probably hoarding shiny stuff. I've seen it before." But her voice didn't carry the same casual tone as before. There was a note, just faint, of doubt. Tom kept unzipping, the golden object becoming clearer, brighter with every inch. Gasps murmured in the air as onlookers craned their necks, now fully invested in the scene. Even the background noise of the airport seemed to dim, like the whole terminal had leaned in. The suitcase finally fell open. Inside, neatly packed and wrapped with cloth and foam, was a stunning collection of golden and silver medical instruments. Some looked antique, engraved with symbols and names. Others gleamed with cutting-edge precision, modern tools carefully nestled in velvet-lined boxes. Stethoscopes, surgical scissors, even portable diagnostic devices. But that wasn't all. Tucked between the items were plaques and certificates. One bore the golden seal of Doctors Without Borders. Another was a framed letter with a United Nations logo at the top, thick, cream-colored paper bearing an official watermark. Tom stood frozen, his hand still on the edge of the suitcase. Lisa stepped forward, gently lifting one of the items, her earlier sarcasm evaporating into silence. It was a glass-encased medal, inscribed with a name, Dr. Amina Daniels, for Distinguished Global Medical Service. Another certificate beneath it showed her photo, her same calm face, slightly younger, smiling beside a team of health workers in the middle of a desert. The signature at the bottom read, UNICEF Global Health Initiative Director. There were photos too, images of Amina in field hospitals, administering vaccines, helping deliver babies under tents. One photo showed her wading through a flooded village, a medical kit slung over her back surrounded by children clinging to her coat. Another had her holding an elderly woman's hand, smiling, with a war-torn building smoldering in the background. No one spoke. Even Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Tom's jaw tightened. The flush of embarrassment began to creep up his neck. He looked around. The spectators were no longer amused. They were watching with widened eyes, some with mouths slightly open, others now holding their phones openly, capturing the moment not as entertainment but as revelation. Lisa started, her voice barely a whisper. You thought wrong," came a quiet voice. It was Mr. Barlow, the airport's senior manager, who had quietly approached during the commotion. His eyes scanned the contents of the suitcase, then rested on Amina. He recognized the name on the documents instantly. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Daniels," he said, his tone suddenly reverent, almost fragile. "If I had known—" "You didn't need to know," Amina replied, still standing, calmly beside the table, her voice smooth like still water. "I didn't come here for recognition, just to get home." Her words weren't angry, but they carried the full weight of dignity, a kind of quiet that silences louder things. Tom took a step back, suddenly unsure of what to do with his hands. Lisa's gaze dropped to the floor. One of the agents gently began repacking the suitcase without being told. Amina stepped forward and helped, her movements careful and practiced as if she'd done this many times. Packed and unpacked pieces of her life for people who could never fully understand it. The silence hung heavier now. Not of judgment, but of realization. Something sacred had just been unearthed in the middle of a routine checkpoint. And no one could look away. As the final zipper tooth parted and the suitcase opened wide, the air seemed to shift. Tom and Lisa stared into its depths, expressions locked somewhere between confusion and disbelief. Whatever assumptions they'd formed, of junk, clutter, or odd souvenirs, dissolved instantly. Inside lay a collection that looked more like a curated exhibit from a world-class museum than the contents of an old, battered suitcase. Dozens of handmade medical tools, intricately carved and polished with care, filled compartments wrapped in worn cloth. Some instruments bore tiny engravings in Swahili and Arabic. Others were ancient in style, yet clearly well-kept and functional, preserved with reverence. Next to them were framed certificates, their edges carefully protected in bubble wrap and canvas. They bore the emblems of organizations most people only ever saw in news articles: the World Health Organization, UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders, the Red Crescent, and the Pan-African Medical Council. The names were official, the language was formal, but the name printed at the top of each one was the same. Dr. Amina Daniels, a laminated ID card from Médecins Sans Frontières, rested near the top, next to a stethoscope with a cracked but polished diaphragm. In the corner of the suitcase, partly folded, was a thick photo album, the kind stitched by hand with pages yellowed by time and travel. Lisa reached for it, her gloves trembling slightly. She opened it to the first page. The photo was grainy, but powerful. Amina kneeling beside a child in a dusty village, bandaging a deep wound while the child's mother held his hand. A chalkboard in the background listed emergency treatments in French and Wolof. On the next page, Amina stood smiling beside a small group of volunteers beside a new water well, with a painted sign above it reading, "Clean Water for Life. Gift from Dr. Daniels." Each image told a story of hardship met with compassion. She was in crowded tents with malaria patients, on a boat, delivering supplies down a flooded river, in the rubble of a collapsed school, giving first aid to children still dazed from the blast. In a photograph from Cambodia, she stood barefoot, soaked in sweat, helping a midwife deliver twins. Then something slipped from the inner pouch, a thick sealed envelope. It fluttered onto the table, landing softly but with an unmistakable weight. The corner was embossed with the insignia of the United Nations. Tom picked it up gingerly and opened it, the envelope cracking with dryness. He began to read aloud, softly, at first. "Dear Dr. Daniels, on behalf of the UN Health and Humanitarian Council, we extend our deepest gratitude for your 2 decades of unparalleled service in global crisis zones. Your unwavering commitment to healing, your courage in places others refuse to go, and your belief in the dignity of all human life have saved thousands. You are, in every sense, a hero of our world." Tom's voice faltered. The crowd that had gathered behind the checkpoint was silent. Not one phone clicked, not one cough. The room stood still. From somewhere behind the velvet ropes, a passenger murmured in awe, just loud enough to break the quiet, "She's a doctor?" The words hung in the air like incense, delicate and reverent. Another voice chimed in, almost a whisper. "No, she's the doctor." Tom looked up at Amina slowly. All his previous arrogance had drained from his face. Now there was only a helpless sort of shame. Like a man who had stared at greatness, mocked it, and was just beginning to understand the size of his mistake. Lisa's mouth opened slightly. Her hands dropped to her sides. Amina stood exactly where she had been before. Still, calm, But her eyes, which had remained steady until now, seemed to soften, not with pride or triumph, but with a kind of tired kindness. The kind only people who've seen too much injustice carry in their eyes. "I wasn't expecting applause," she said quietly. "Only respect." It wasn't a rebuke. It wasn't bitter. It was a truth, laid bare like everything else in that suitcase. Mr. Barlow, the airport manager, stepped forward again, this time with his hat in hand. "Dr. Daniels, please forgive this oversight," he said, his voice measured. "I assure you this isn't how we conduct ourselves." She looked at him for a moment, then down at the suitcase again. Her fingers moved gently over the edge of one certificate, smoothing the worn paper like it was a page in a holy book. "I've had worse," she said with a faint smile. "In Syria, we performed surgeries in caves by flashlight. In the Congo, we delivered vaccines by canoe during monsoons. A little embarrassment in an airport, that's survivable." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman let out a soft, choked laugh. It broke the tension just enough for people to breathe again. Tom cleared his throat. I didn't know," he said, voice hoarse. "You didn't ask," Amina replied gently. "But that's okay. Now you do." She knelt to begin closing. Her suitcase, her movements practiced and patient, wrapping each item with the care of someone who had packed her life thousands of times. Not just objects, but meaning and memory, and proof. As the final flap folded shut and she latched the suitcase, the silence still lingered. But it was different now. Not awkward, not judging, just deeply, profoundly humbled. And as Amina stood, suitcase in hand, the whisper of her footsteps on the airport tile sounded louder than any word spoken that day. The silence had not yet fully lifted when Mr. Barlow, the airport manager, stepped forward. His polished shoes clicked softly on the floor, the only sound breaking the stillness as passengers and staff stood transfixed. He had heard the commotion. From his office, at first a ripple, then a wave, and came only intending to manage a delay. But as he moved closer and his eyes fell upon the open suitcase, everything changed. He saw the certificates, the medals, the faded photographs, and most of all, the name, Dr. Amina Daniels. It hit him like a bell struck deep in memory. He had seen that name before, on a humanitarian newsletter, in a global health briefing, in an award ceremony clip that aired once late at night, when few people were watching. But he had remembered it. Everyone who read about her did. He removed his cap slowly, the stiffness of authority melting into something more human. "Dr. Daniels," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. "Please accept my deepest apologies. I had no idea. None of us did." Amina didn't immediately respond. She crouched down beside her suitcase, tucking the last certificate into a protective sleeve, her movements fluid and composed. Then, with the same gentle care, she closed the case. The duct tape flexed with a faint crinkle as she latched it, shut. Each motion was quiet, final, as though sealing away not just belongings, but the weight of a moment, and the judgment that came with it. She stood and looked at Mr. Barlow, not unkindly, but without a trace of surprise. Her eyes held a stillness that spoke of experience. This wasn't the first time she had been misjudged, and it likely wouldn't be the last. "I appreciate your words," she said at last, "but I don't need an apology." There was no arrogance. In her tone, only clarity. It was not bitterness. It was survival. Mr. Barlow lowered his head. "Nonetheless, I owe you one. We all do." Behind him, the crowd remained hushed. Their faces changed. The earlier expressions of mockery, of condescension, of detached amusement had melted into something else entirely. Shame, awe, and for some, a quiet private admiration. Lisa, still standing near the inspection table, removed her gloves slowly, as if they weighed more now. She took a tentative step toward Amina, her mouth opening, then closing. Words gathered, disassembled, and scattered again like birds startled mid-flight. She began. Amina turned to her, eyes meeting hers with unwavering calm. Lisa's voice faltered. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know who you were." That's the problem, Amina said gently. You looked at me and decided who I was anyway. It wasn't said to wound, but it cut. Not with cruelty, but with truth. A clean, undeniable truth. Lisa's mouth pressed into a line. Her eyes dropped to the floor. Whatever apology she might have tried to form dissolved in the air. Tom stood frozen a few feet away, his expression locked between guilt and helplessness. His earlier bravado had vanished, leaving only the raw discomfort of a man forced to confront himself. Amina gave neither of them judgment nor forgiveness. She simply gave them silence. And then quietly, she picked up her suitcase. The handle wobbled, just as it had before, but this time no one laughed. The sound of the wheels dragging across the floor seemed louder now, more meaningful, like the echo of something being left behind. Or maybe something being carried forward. As she stepped beyond the checkpoint, a child, a little girl holding her mother's hand, turned to look at her. Wide eyes, filled with wonder. The mother, holding back tears, leaned down and whispered something to the girl. She pointed at the suitcase, then at Amina. The girl nodded solemnly. That moment mattered, more than any apology. Mr. Barlow stepped aside, his hand held respectfully over his chest as Amina passed. She nodded once, not as a gesture of thanks, but as a mark of dignity, her own. The passengers parted for her like water around a rock, no longer seeing her as the woman with the broken luggage, but as something far larger, something they hadn't understood until now. The buzz of the terminal resumed, slowly. Voices returned, though quieter. Conversations restarted, but with a different tone. There were no more jokes, no more side glances, just the sound of a suitcase, rolling over smooth tile, and the feeling that something had shifted, because it had, and none of them would forget it. The terminal lights gleamed overhead, casting long shadows across the floor as Dr. Amina Daniels walked on. Her suitcase, scuffed, patched and heavy with more than just objects, rolled faithfully behind her, wheels clicking softly against the polished tile. The crowd still stood, watching, but said nothing. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them. A shift, not just of perception, but of awareness. Judgments had been made. Lessons were being learned. Amina didn't glance back. She had done what she came to do, and that was enough. But just as she reached the corridor leading to the boarding gates, a small voice called out from behind her. "Excuse me, miss." Footsteps padded hurriedly on the floor. Amina turned slowly. A young girl, no more than 8, broke from her mother's side and rushed up, her braids bouncing against her backpack. She looked up with wide, hopeful eyes that shimmered with something bigger than admiration. It was recognition, the kind that crosses generations, borders, and blood. "I want to help people like you one day," the girl said breathlessly, her voice trembling with sincerity. "I want to be brave like you." Amina knelt down so. Their eyes met on the same level. Her face softened, and for the first time since the inspection, she smiled, truly smiled, and it was a smile that held lifetimes inside it. The kind earned through pain, preserved through compassion. She reached forward and gently took the girl's hand. "What's your name?" she asked. "Imani," the girl whispered. Amina nodded. "That's a powerful name. You know what it means?" The girl beamed. "It means faith." "That's right." Amina squeezed her hand lightly. "Keep it. You'll need it." Imani bit her lip, then asked, with the pure directness only a child could manage, "How did you know you wanted to help people?" Amina looked past her for a moment, as if remembering something far away. Dusty roads, cracked hands, crying mothers. The quiet peace of a child's fever finally broken. "I didn't always know," she answered. "But I knew I couldn't walk past pain and pretend it wasn't mine. So I followed that feeling, and it took me to places I never imagined." Imani nodded solemnly, absorbing each word like a seed pressed into soil. Amina's expression grew serious, though still kind. If you want to help people, Imani, she said gently, start with this. Never judge anyone by what they carry. Girl tilted her head. What do you mean? Amina gestured to her suitcase. This looks broken, right? Imani looked at it and nodded shyly. People laughed at it. They thought it was full of junk. But it carried my whole life, my work, my hopes, my mistakes, my purpose. She paused, letting that settle. Sometimes, Amina continued, people carry things you can't see. Pain, wisdom, kindness, strength. If you judge them by what's on the outside, by what they wear, how they talk, the color of their skin, or what kind of suitcase they have, you'll miss everything that really matters. Imani looked down at the suitcase again, her young face thoughtful. I won't forget, she whispered. I know you won't, Amina said. You're already stronger than most. Imani threw her arms around Amina's neck. The embrace was brief but fierce, a moment only two hearts could understand. When she pulled back, her mother was standing nearby, eyes wet but proud. She mouthed, "Thank you," and Amina nodded. As she turned again toward her gate, something had shifted, not just in the girl, but in the air around them. The crowd that had watched her with curiosity and skepticism now looked on with something deeper: respect, reflection, quiet resolve. A father clutched his son's hand a little tighter. A teenager lowered his phone, unsure why he'd even lifted it in the first place. An elderly woman closed her book, her eyes wet, remembering a different kind of airport and a different kind of injustice from years long gone. Tom and Lisa still stood near the checkpoint, changed in ways they couldn't name yet. Lisa looked down at her own designer bag with discomfort, as if seeing it for the first time. Tom rubbed the back of his neck, finally understanding the weight of what had happened, what he had almost erased with a smirk. Mr. Barlow watched Amina disappear down the corridor, then turned back to his team, his voice low but firm. We need to do better, he said, starting today. And slowly the crowd began to disperse. But the hush lingered, not of shame anymore, but of awareness. Like the quiet after a storm, when you know something has been washed clean and the air feels honest again. Somewhere, a voice on the intercom announced boarding for an international flight. But most people weren't listening. Their minds were elsewhere, on a woman with a worn suitcase, a child with big dreams, and a lesson carried not in hands, but in hearts. And so Dr. Amina Daniels walked forward, not into applause or ceremony, but into the quiet dignity of her next chapter, and behind her, in the wake of her footsteps, bloomed the kind of silence that only truth can leave behind.